Hi, I'm Clara, and today's story will take you on a journey of betrayal and sweet revenge. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old money. My father's study had the kind of silence that felt like a person, heavy, watchful, full of things that had been left unsaid. I grew up in that silence, learning to read the small movements of people. The way my father's hand would tremble when he read a bill, the way my stepmother, Evelyn, would smooth her skirt as if smoothing the world into place. To everyone else, she was polished, warm, the woman who'd rescued my dad from loneliness. To me, she was a slow, steady pressure, always rearranging, always measuring. When Dad got sick, the house changed. Machines hummed. Nurses came and went. Evelyn's smile sharpened into efficiency. She handled appointments, insurance calls, and the endless parade of specialists with a competence that made her indispensable. I was there too, late nights, cold coffee, the small, private tasks that no one noticed. I sat with him. I read to him. I learned the cadence of his breathing. I learned the weight of the word family. After he passed, the will reading was supposed to be a quiet, private thing. Instead, it became a performance. Evelyn insisted on a lawyer. Her lawyer, someone with a silver tie and a voice that made everything sound inevitable. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Marisol, who smelled faintly of jasmine and carried a stack of legal pads like armor. She was not flashy. She didn't have a booming voice or a designer suit. She had a steady gaze and a way of asking questions that made people reveal themselves. Evelyn didn't like that. She didn't like that I had a voice in the room. She didn't like that I had someone who would not be cowed. The first time she mocked Marisol, it was a small thing, an aside, a laugh that cut through the room like a knife. "Oh, how quaint," she said, loud enough for the people in the back to hear. "Is that your lawyer? She looks like she sells candles at a craft fair." The words landed like stones. I remember the physical sensation. My stomach dropped, my hands went cold, and my throat tightened as if someone had tied a ribbon around it. I wanted to stand up and tell Evelyn to shut up. I wanted to tell her that my lawyer had put herself through law school, that she had worked nights and weekends, that she had defended people who had no one else. But the room was full of relatives and acquaintances who smiled politely, and my voice felt like a small, fragile thing. Marisol didn't flinch. She smiled, the kind of smile that is not an apology but a measurement. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was quiet but precise. "I'm here to represent my client's interests." Evelyn's laugh was louder this time, a brittle sound that made my father's old friends shift in their seats. She made a show of checking her nails, of looking at the clock. She made it clear she thought we were beneath her. That moment was the seed. It was small, but it grew roots. Evelyn's mockery didn't stop at jokes. She began to make decisions that felt like erasures. She moved Dad's favorite chair to the attic for safekeeping. She changed the locks on the study and told me it was for privacy. She started telling stories, little lies about how Dad had always wanted her to manage everything, how he had been worried about me, how she had been the one to keep the family afloat. People believed her. People wanted to believe the tidy version of events. The legal battle that followed was not dramatic in the way movies make it. It was a slow, grinding thing, paperwork, depositions, whispered conversations in hallways. But Evelyn's attitude never softened. At mediation, she smirked when Marisol asked a question. At a deposition, she rolled her eyes and said, "This is getting tedious." She treated the process like a game where she had already won. I felt small. I felt like a child watching an adult rearrange the furniture of my life. The injustice was not only legal, it was personal. It was the way she dismissed my grief, the way she turned my father's memory into a prop for her own narrative. I lay awake at night, replaying the moments, feeling the heat of humiliation flush my face. I wanted to be angry, but anger felt messy and dangerous. I wanted justice, but justice felt like a distant shore. Marisol and I talked late into the night. She would sit at my kitchen table with a mug of tea and a legal pad, and we would map out the next steps. "We don't win by shouting," she said once, tapping her pen. "We win by being precise." Her calm steadied me. She taught me to translate my hurt into facts, dates, signatures, witnesses. She taught me to collect the small things Evelyn thought were meaningless: emails, receipts, the nurse's notes that contradicted Evelyn's version of events. But the thing that kept gnawing at me was Evelyn's contempt. It wasn't just that she wanted the money or the house. It was that she wanted to erase me. She wanted to make it look like I had been a peripheral figure, a child who had been cared for by a more competent adult. That contempt was a kind of violence. It made me feel invisible. So I started to pay attention in a new way. I watched Evelyn's patterns. I listened to the way she spoke to people. I noticed the small inconsistencies in her stories. I kept a notebook, dates, times, phrases. I recorded the way she mocked Marisol, the way she dismissed witnesses, the way she tried to make the legal process into a spectacle. Each entry in that notebook felt like a small reclamation. Each line was a way of saying, "I am here." I remember. The first section ends with a courtroom looming like a storm. The audience should feel the slow build of resentment, the small humiliations stacking up until they become unbearable. The purpose here is to make you feel the protagonist's powerlessness and the moral clarity that grows from it. You should be rooting for Clara, feeling the heat of her humiliation and the quiet, dangerous resolve that begins to form. The morning of the pre-trial conference, the house felt like a stage set. Evelyn had arranged flowers in the foyer, white lilies, the kind that smell like funerals and fresh starts. She wore a dress that said, "I am composed." She smiled at the neighbors who came by with casseroles and condolences. She smiled at me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. At the conference, she arrived with a retinue: her lawyer, a friend who nodded at everything she said, and a woman who introduced herself as a family consultant. Evelyn's strategy was obvious: overwhelm with appearances, drown the room in certainty. She made jokes about family drama and laughed when someone mentioned the will. The message was clear. She was untouchable. Marisol and I sat across from them. I remember the way my hands felt, callous from work, but trembling. Marisol's presence was a steadying force. She had a way of listening that made you feel like your words were being placed in a safe. She asked questions that cut through the noise. Who was present when the will was signed? Were there witnesses? Can we see the medical records? Evelyn's answers were theatrical. She waved her hand and said, "Oh, Clara was always so emotional. She wasn't involved in the details." She said it like a verdict. The room laughed politely. I felt my face go hot. I wanted to stand and say, "You are lying." But Marisol's hand on my knee was a reminder to breathe. The escalation came in small, cruel ways. Evelyn began to restrict access to Dad's things. She told the housekeeper to pack up certain boxes and send them to storage. She told family members that Dad had wanted a quiet life and that he had trusted her to make the right choices. She called my friends and told them that I was difficult and unreasonable. She tried to isolate me. That isolation was the turning point. It's one thing to be mocked in a room full of people. It's another to be made to feel like you are the problem. I started to doubt myself. I replayed conversations, wondering if I had misremembered. I felt the old, familiar ache of being gaslit. But Marisol kept me anchored. She would say, "We have the facts. We have witnesses. We have the timeline." Her confidence was not bluster. It was preparation. We began to plan. Not revenge in the melodramatic sense, no traps, no dramatic confrontations, but a legal strategy that would expose Evelyn's pattern. We gathered documents, bank statements showing transfers, emails where Evelyn contradicted her testimony, notes from nurses that showed Dad's wishes were different from what Evelyn claimed. We found a neighbor who had seen Evelyn moving boxes the week after Dad's funeral. We found a former housekeeper who remembered Evelyn's offhand comments about taking care of things. The planning process was meticulous. Marisol taught me how to present evidence, so it could not be dismissed as petty. She taught me to build a narrative that a judge could not ignore, a timeline of control, a pattern of exclusion, and a series of small deceptions that added up to a larger truth. We rehearsed depositions. We practiced staying calm when provoked. We wrote questions that would force Evelyn to contradict herself. Emotionally, the The planning was a strange mixture of cold calculation and burning need. I felt like a surgeon, precise, focused, removing the diseased tissue. But I also felt the heat of revenge, a desire to see Evelyn's smirk replaced by something like shame. I told myself that this was not about cruelty, it was about restoring what had been taken. That moral justification kept me steady. There were moments of doubt. I would wake up in the night and imagine Evelyn triumphant, laughing as she walked through the house with a new set of keys. I would imagine the judge dismissing our claims as sour grapes. Those fears were real. But each time, I would open my notebook and read the list of facts. The facts were a kind of armor. As the trial date approached, Evelyn grew bolder. She began to mock Marisol openly in court filings, calling her overly dramatic and unprofessional. She sent a letter to the family accusing me of trying to sabotage the estate. She posted a photo on social media of herself at a charity gala with the caption, "Keeping the family legacy alive." The post was a slap in the face. On the eve of the trial, Marisol and I sat in her office. The room smelled of paper and coffee. She looked at me and said, "Tomorrow we don't need theatrics. We need clarity. We need to show the judge the pattern." I nodded. My hands were steady now. The fear had been transformed into focus. We also planned for the moment Evelyn would try to humiliate us. Marisol had a strategy for that too. She would let Evelyn speak. She would let the mockery happen in the open because mockery leaves traces, tone, timing, the exact words. Judges notice those things. People notice them. The plan was to let Evelyn reveal herself and then to use her own words against her. That night, I barely slept. I walked through the house, touching the things that had belonged to my father. I held a photograph of him and felt the old grief wash over me. But beneath the grief was a new feeling, a quiet, fierce determination. I was no longer the person who would shrink away. I had a lawyer who believed in me, a stack of evidence, and a plan that turned humiliation into proof. The second section ends with the protagonist walking into the courthouse, the weight of the notebook in her bag like a talisman. The audience should feel the tension ratchet up, the sense that something big is about to happen, that the slow burn of injustice is about to meet a carefully prepared flame. The purpose here is to show the transformation from powerless to prepared, to make the audience eager for the courtroom showdown. The courthouse smelled like old wood and lemon polish. People moved with a kind of ritualized purpose. Whispers, the shuffle of papers, the soft clack of heels. I felt my heart beat in my throat as we took our seats. Marisol's hand found mine for a moment, a small, human anchor. Evelyn arrived like a queen. Her dress was immaculate. Her smile was practiced. She sat with her lawyer and made small, theatrical gestures, tilting her head, checking her watch. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge entered, a woman with silver hair and an expression that suggested she had seen many human dramas and was not easily impressed. The trial began with the usual formalities. Then came the part Evelyn had been waiting for, her testimony. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and began to speak in that polished voice. She told the story she had told so many times, how she had cared for my father, how she had been his confidant, how she had been the one to protect the family. She spoke of difficult decisions and sacrifice. The courtroom listened. Then Marisol called our first witness, the former housekeeper. She described the boxes, the late-night trips to storage, the way Evelyn had insisted on sorting through Dad's things immediately after the funeral. Evelyn's face tightened. She shifted in her seat. When the housekeeper mentioned a specific date, Evelyn's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. Next came the neighbor, who testified about seeing Evelyn move items and about a conversation where Evelyn had said, "We'll handle it. Clara's too emotional to be trusted." The words landed like a blow. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. It was a small movement, but in that courtroom, it felt like thunder. Then came the emails. Marisol presented a chain of messages where Evelyn had written to a financial advisor, asking about transferring accounts and changing beneficiaries. Evelyn's lawyer tried to dismiss them as routine, but the tone of the emails was not routine. They were directive, confident, and most damningly, contradictory to Evelyn's testimony about respecting Dad's wishes. Evelyn's mockery began to show cracks. She tried to laugh it off when Marisol asked about a specific phrase she had used in a deposition. "Oh, that was a joke," she said, but the judge's eyebrow rose again. The courtroom was quiet. The judge's small gestures were doing the work of 1,000 words. She was listening, and she was not amused. Then came the moment everyone remembers. Marisol had saved the most precise piece of evidence for last, a recorded conversation between Evelyn and a friend, made before the will was finalized. In it, Evelyn spoke plainly about making sure things were handled and about not letting Clara get in the way. She used the exact phrase she had used in court to dismiss me. The recording played, and Evelyn's face went pale. The judge leaned forward. She asked a question, calm, precise, about the timing of the recording and whether Evelyn had been aware of the legal implications. Evelyn stammered. She tried to claim the recording was taken out of context. The judge's eyebrow rose again, this time with a hint of impatience. What followed was a cascade. The judge asked about the bank transfers. Evelyn's lawyer tried to explain them as administrative, but the pattern was clear. Transfers made shortly after Dad's death, accounts changed without clear authorization, and a trail of emails that suggested a plan rather than a mistake. The judge's questions were surgical. She asked for receipts, for signatures, for the names of witnesses. Each answer Evelyn gave contradicted something else she had said. At one point, Evelyn tried to mock Marisol directly. She smiled and said, "My lawyer is very experienced, unlike some." The courtroom tensed. Marisol did not respond with heat. She responded with a single, precise question that forced Evelyn to repeat the phrase in front of the judge. When Evelyn did, the judge's eyebrow lifted in a way that felt like a verdict. The judge said, "Ms. Evelyn, your tone is noted." It was a small line, but it carried weight. The payoff came when the judge ruled on a motion to freeze certain accounts pending further review. The judge explained, in a voice that was both fair and firm, that the evidence suggested a pattern of behavior that warranted protection of the estate. Evelyn's face crumpled. She looked like someone who had been caught mid-performance. The smirk was gone. The room felt the shift, like the air changing after storm. I remember the physical sensation of that moment. My shoulders unclenching, a warmth spreading through my chest, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. It wasn't triumph in the way revenge fantasies promise. It was relief. It was validation. It was the feeling of being seen. After the ruling, Evelyn tried to compose herself. She left the courtroom with her lawyer, her posture rigid. I watched her go and felt a complicated mix of emotions, satisfaction, yes, but also a strange pity. She had built her life on the idea that she could control the narrative. When that narrative unraveled, she had nothing left. In the days that followed, the estate was put under temporary oversight. The accounts were audited. Some family members who had been silent began to speak. People who had been charmed by Evelyn's performance started to ask questions. The social media posts came down. The charity gala photos were quietly archived. I don't tell this story to gloat. The point is not that Evelyn was humiliated, though she was. The point is that careful, patient work can turn mockery into evidence. The moral justification here is simple. When someone uses contempt as a weapon, exposing the truth is not cruelty, it's justice. In the quiet after the storm, I sat in my father's study and opened the notebook I had kept. The pages were full of dates and phrases and small, stubborn truths. I ran my fingers over the ink and felt a kind of closure. I thought about Marisol, who had been steady and precise, and about the way the judge's small gestures had done more than any speech could. Justice is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a slow, methodical process that requires patience and courage. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply the truth being heard. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? And, of course, subscribe for more stories like this. I'm Clara. Thanks for listening.